Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. Well guys, I had an awesome intro written for real for this video, which somehow ballooned into a 10-minute discussion all by itself. Discovery writing is fun. So unfortunately you get no preachy, eloquent, or hype intro this time, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. We're gonna talk about Jewelry Bonney, the pirate who inspired her, and the various connections and conclusions we can make from there. Tinfoils at half-mast. Anne Bonny is one of the most famous pirates in all of history, written about by Captain Charles Johnson, a possible pseudonym of English author Daniel Defoe, within the volume A General History of Pirates. But the truth is that as a pirate, her career lasted only a few months, and she didn't really accomplish anything of much great significance comparatively to other world-famous pirates. She is most well-known, legendary, and romanticized, along with fellow crewmate Mary Read, for being one of only a handful of female pirates that existed at the time, which was considered by sailors to be bad luck. I would say that the heart of Anne Bonny's story, and why we still hear about it today, isn't because she was a great pirate, it's because her story is compelling. It's a story of love, betrayal, chasing your own dreams, against the odds. As many know, Jewelry Bonney's name was inspired by Anne Bonny. Jewelry Bonney, Anne Bonny, it checks out. But what is not widely known is that the connection actually goes further than this, and although I've never seen this theory had it been made, it would have become a spoiler. This was foreshadowed by Oda just after the events of Marineford, hundreds of chapters after her debut during the Reverie. It was revealed that Jewelry Bonney has a connection to Bartholomew Kuma. We discovered that she had infiltrated Mary Joie somehow, and intended to rescue Kuma from his slavery and his fate. And when you go back and read all the scenes with Jewelry Bonney, or at least many of them, it becomes clear that Oda had this idea in mind for a very long time. In real life history, at a young age, Anne Bonny and her family immigrated to the United States, to South Carolina, from Ireland. Her father actually wished for her to marry a local man, but she refused, instead choosing sailor and leader husband, James Bonney, then moving to Nassau in the Bahamas, a place notorious for its pirate influence, considered to be a safe haven. So why is this important? Because James Bonney became an informant for the governor of New Province, the island in which Nassau was the capital. James Bonney reported to him the movement of pirates within the area, which led to the arrest of many. James Bonney is in fact very similar to Bartholomew Kuma. Kuma, who was also a famous pirate, who then became subservient to the world government. I think that it's very likely here that Oda took inspiration for Kuma and Bonny's relationship from Anne Bonny and her husband James Bonney. But this is where we can take it further. Within the story of Anne Bonny, her relationship with James was not the most significant. Anne Bonny became disillusioned with her husband, in part because of his actions, and so she fell in love with another man in Nassau and ran off with him, in turn becoming a pirate herself. The real romance that captured the imagination of people in the 1700s was Anne Bonny's relationship with the pirate, John Rackham, more commonly known as Calico Jack. So we're starting off with this premise. Was Oda also inspired to include a Calico Jack within Jewelry Bonney's story in One Piece? So obviously here, guys, this is where we have to get creative because Oda has not borrowed all of the history here, and there is assuredly many things that will be unique to One Piece. However, the character in One Piece, named after, inspired by, at least in part, Calico Jack, is Calico Yorki, captain of the Rumbar Pirates, Brooke's former crew. To even entertain this connection and its relevance though, you must first buy this theory, that Yorki is even alive and present somewhere within the One Piece world. Because last we checked, he was supposed to have died. That's the implication. For longtime viewers of this channel, we've talked about this theory before, and until Oda decides to kill it, I will argue for the possibility that Yorki is alive. His death in the story was handled in a way very similar to other supposed deaths that turned out to be untrue, or that may be untrue, and I can argue why. But let's first get this straight, right? Oda has no problem killing characters in flashbacks, killing them in such a way for us to know for sure that they are dead. Corazon, Belmir, Hiluluk, Usopp's mother, Clover, Fisher Tiger, Otohime, you get it. These characters are for sure dead. Oda is not afraid of doing this. However, there are some characters whose fate Oda leaves ambiguous for reasons only known to himself. Nico Olvia and Tom. These are two extremely interesting cases. Neither are confirmed dead. The last we saw Tom, he was being taken to Enies Lobby for judgment and frankly nearly killed himself trying to stop the train. But what happened to Tom? We don't actually know. I would say though, given his connection to the blueprints of Pluton, do you think that Tom was quickly sentenced to death and then killed? I'm personally really doubtful. I think Oda was ambiguous about Tom's death because he intends to reintroduce him later, wherever he may be, in whatever state. And I think that Olvia may be an even better example of this very same concept. The implication obviously is that a buster call was ordered on Ohara and everybody died, including Olvia. However, we never actually saw her die. But within the same flashback, we saw Jaguar D. Sol die for sure. Olvia's death could have also been emotional, and really Oda would have only needed to spend 1, maybe 2 panels, and all speculation would be thrown out the window. Olvia knows how to read the poneglyphs. I think that you can be certain that Ohara's skill set would be of some value to the world government, to at least discover what they knew, and who they told. For me, this is another ambiguous death that is primed to be explained and build the story further. Tom and Olvia are two characters that it just makes sense for the world government to not have finished the job and killed them if they were still alive. Honestly, if you stop and think about it, Oda has written a lot of stories. He's played with a lot of different scenarios, but one that he hasn't done, but we know that he intends to eventually, is the reintroduction of a lost mentor. Obviously, Luffy will meet Shanks, and it's kind of like that. But I think another interesting way to take this story is for Straw Hat to find and save a mentor or parent that they thought were dead. Luffy obviously doesn't think that Shanks is dead, so this meeting is expected. This leads us into another character that supposedly died in a flashback very ambiguously, but was not actually dead. Sabo. This would be similar to Sabo, except from an angle that would appeal in a different way. Making not your brother or your friend, but your role model, your hero, or your parent proud in a totally unexpected way. Oda has not done this yet, and both of these cases present opportunity. So obviously here we are actually talking about Calico Yorki, who is just the same as these two. He had a very ambiguous death within his flashback. Conspicuously, I think, for the fact that Oda showed every single Rumbar pirate die, including Brooke, except for Yorki. I will say this until it is dead. Yorki's death to me seems to heavily imply that he could and maybe even should still be alive, because he made a promise to live and sing once more with Brooke. Let's watch it together.
Yorki 船長、私その言葉忘れませんからね。刻みました。命大事にね、船長。お互い生きてみんなでまた会いましょうよ。みんなでまた歌いましょうよ。
Whatever your opinion might be, or whatever it is that you might want, I think that you at least have to acknowledge Oda left open the possibility that Yorki survived in a very direct way. If that were to happen, we could look back to the scene and think to ourselves, oh yeah, of course, it makes sense. More so than any other flashback death, with the possible exception of Sabo, who actually came back. Promises mean something within One Piece. Of course, they can fail. But here Oda had a chance to definitively kill Yorki off right here, and he chose not to. He left it ambiguous, seemingly on purpose. Yorki, along with the other infected crew members, left the ship in order to escape through the comm belt and find a cure. Anybody out there saying Yorki is factually dead is equally as wrong as people saying that he is factually still alive. In this way, I think that a lot of people misrepresent the Rumbar pirates and Brooke's promise to Laboon. People say, well, Yorki can't be alive because that would undermine Brooke's dream. No, guys, it absolutely would not. Yorki said himself, give my regards to Laboon. While it is implied that he intends to survive, the promise was, and always has been, to meet Laboon once more by continuing forward. Yes, the actual promise to Laboon was, let us meet again, but in a way so it does not undermine us abandoning you in the first place. Brooke says this, "I have my pride as a pirate. You are waiting for us to return to you after circling the globe. I intend to keep my promise by returning from the right direction." As long as Yorki could not continue forward and conquer the Grand Line, he could not fulfill his promise to Laboon. If he were to be alive, I think that he would have instead spent his time looking for his former crew, potentially eventually retired as a defeated man. In a way, Yorki represents the other half of Brooke. In this case, I think that you could imagine Brooke's story is all about loneliness, 50 years by himself, carried forward by his desire, his promise to Laboon. That is why Brooke didn't kill himself. Yorki would be carried in the same way. But the difference between the two is that Brooke never gave up hope, while maybe Yorki did, and maybe ashamed, never returned to Laboon, because he could not return with his crew from the right direction. In this way, Yorki could still be alive, and yet Brooke still inherited his dream. Brooke is still fulfilling his dream. This is not totally unheard of. For instance, Shanks and Luffy. Shanks is still alive, yet Luffy has inherited something from him, and Shanks has placed some faith within him to accomplish what he could not. The same is true of Zeph and Sanji. The only difference here is that Oda has twisted this in a slightly different way, such that we believe that Yorki is dead. This could also be very similar to Zoro and Kuina, except for, again, the twist, the difference. Kuina is actually dead, Yorki is not. Oda plays with various different scenarios. You gotta get pretty creative with a manga this long. But the obvious question here, the more important question is, first, how did Yorki survive? We know that Yorki intended to leave the Grand Line through the Calm Belt. We also know that such a feat is considered impossible at the best of times because of the Sea Kings and because of his disease. If Yorki survived, he would have had to have been very lucky, and I think that he was. In Amazon Lily, we have this panel. That's right, this is the island of women in the Calm Belt. That's why normal sea travelers don't come here. The few people who wash ashore are mostly already dead. Is this foreshadowing? If you actually look at a One Piece map, traveling from the Florian Triangle-esque area through the Calm Belt, it's conceivably possible to go in a way that you would pass through Amazon Lily. And I just want you to keep this in the back of your mind. If you were to leave the Grand Line through the Calm Belt while also passing through Amazon Lily, the sea that you would end up in is the South Blue, which is the home of Jewelry Bonny. Oda here, at the very least, took the time when he didn't really need to set up the possibility of people washing ashore to Amazon Lily. That's something that has happened. Also keep in mind that Amazon Lily, the arc itself, was only about 30 chapters after the end of Thriller Bark. So if Oda had already created Yorki's whole story and intended for him to be alive, it's very interesting that sort of the next place that we go to, or very soon, is related to his story. It would have been something that would have been very fresh on Oda's mind. But this all comes together through Gloriosa, or Elder Nyon, former Empress of Amazon Lily, who was stripped of her title for having left Amazon Lily to go to the outer seas, in other words, the Four Blues outside of the Grand Line. She claimed to have left because of love sickness, the very same experienced by all of the recent Empresses of Amazon Lily. However, unlike the others who eventually died, she left Amazon Lily with the one she had grown to love, and thus had learned how to survive love sickness in order to teach Boa Hancock. The theory goes like this: Yorki, sick with the plague, washed ashore, still alive, in Amazon Lily, where he was cured. And sometime during this period, Elder Nyon fell in love with him. Just gonna be direct. Nyon, I think 100% fell in love with a character we know or will know. I've read a lot of One Piece, I've seen a lot of theories, I've seen a lot of right theories. This is just how Oda works. This is how he writes his story. Nyon fell in love with a mysterious man in the distant past and lived, around for years after that. It was surely a pirate or a person of relevance to the story. I wouldn't hold it against you if you speculated Goldie Roger or Whitebeard or whoever, but I think that it was Yorki. And I think that Nyon herself was formerly a pirate, which makes sense anyway because the Empress of Amazon Lily also is always the pirate captain of the Kuja Pirates. And although it's not explicitly stated, I believe that they choose the Empress of Amazon Lily based on who is the strongest. So absolutely 100% I believe that at one point in time, Elder Nyon was strong enough to be a part of a pirate crew and travel the Grand Line. But you might be confused, right? Because Calico Jack had a relationship with Bonney. So we would assume Calico Yorki would have had a relationship with Jewelry Bonny. But this is kind of the struggle of predicting One Piece based on what Oda might be inspired by. Oda absolutely changes history to better suit the One Piece story, and to make it harder to predict the various relationships and things that will happen based on real history or other stories. You know, maybe it'll help you to think about it this way. You can separate Yorki and Jewelry Bonny, despite the fact that the two characters that inspired them, Calico Jack and Bonney, were connected via history. For instance, we could have started this theory with Calico Yorki, and instead of connecting him to Jewelry Bonny, we could have made his Bonney Elder Nyon. And Oda could have been inspired just the same. And this is because, fun fact, Jewelry Bonny was not a character that Oda had yet created when he created Yorki. So it may have always been intended for Elder Nyon to be the Bonney, and then later he created Jewelry Bonny from that same inspiration, and then pieced it together how he wanted to. Calico Jack was most famous not for his pirating prowess, but having been in a crew that had two woman pirates, Bonney and Mary Read. So now let's take the pieces at our disposal and put them together in order to make a cohesive story which might reflect One Piece. Oda takes inspiration, and it is our job to figure out what that inspiration is and then how he's going to change it to suit the story. So in real life, Bonney was married to James Bonney. James Bonney represents Kuma. In the world of One Piece, these two characters, Kuma and Jewelry Bonny, are not married. Jewelry Bonny is his mother. So let's make another change. I think that Jewelry Bonny did not fall in love with Yorki or Calico Jack in One Piece. An interesting part of the Mary Read and Bonney and Calico Jack story was that Calico Jack became jealous of Mary Read because Bonney was attracted to her. The story then goes that essentially Bonney had to prove that Mary Read was in fact a woman so that Calico Jack wouldn't be so jealous. So then Elder Nyon, who also in part represents Bonney, comes from an island of women, and all the relationships there are woman and woman. But just like Calico Jack and Bonney, Yorki and Nyon had to illegally flee her island because of forbidden love. Do you see how we're changing relationships but still keeping story beats? This action ended Yorki's period of retirement, perhaps similar to how Calico Jack retired and then Bonney forced him out to resume a life of pirating. And afterwards Yorki set out to find his crew, realizing finally that they had disappeared. But within the story, Yorki and Nyon didn't just travel alone. Yorki had to recruit other crew members as well to find his lost crew. The Grand Line is a dangerous place, and so Yorki still needed other people. And just like Calico Jack, I think, his second crew carried two important women. One of them was his lover Nyon, and the other Jewelry Bonny, who is much older than she appears to be. They encountered her after leaving the Calm Belt, which heads directly into the South Blue where she is from. So then in this way, Oda has accounted for all of the important characters within Bonney's story. Calico Jack, Calico Yorki, Mary Read, Elder Nyon, and James Bonney or Bartholomew Kuma. I think that one thing that does not really make a whole lot of sense right now about Bonney, even now, is her relationship with Akainu and the world government. Blackbeard defeated her and made a deal with the Navy so that eventually we got this conversation between Akainu and Jewelry Bonny. Akainu said, "A cold shiver ran through me when I heard you had run away from the government. But it's all over now." So yeah, it's basically stated that Bonney was captured by the world government. Somehow this old lady picked up pirating very, very quickly, becoming one of the supernova in just a year. Impressive for an old queen, I would say. My personal theory here, guys, how I make sense of this, is that she became a prominent pirate very quickly because she was a former pirate. She had experience. Her relationship with Akainu comes from being captured as a pirate. Her new identity, Jewelry Bonny, not her actual name, allowed her to reset her history, and perhaps her prior bounty depicted an older woman with a different name, as maybe we see her at the Reverie. She went by Connie. I believe here Jewelry Bonny is disguised as herself. This is what she would really look like. And this is who she really is. Connie, Dowager Queen of Sorbet Island. Dowager meaning that her husband is dead and therefore is not the tyrant Kuma. And I think that we could do a little bit more speculation here. Maybe Jewelry Bonney didn't always have this age-relating devil fruit. We know that the celestial dragons feed devil fruits to their slaves. They have them in abundance and use them fickly. Maybe she just happened to acquire this fruit, or maybe she stole it, and it just so happened to give her an ability to disguise herself, in which the Marines and the celestial dragons were not expecting. How I pieced together Kuma's story, based on what we know right now, is that he became a warlord for them because they held something over his head that he could not give up. Mind you, they didn't and still do not know that he was a revolutionary. It is also important to speculate that neither Dragon nor Ivankov seemed to know what had happened to him, so this decision was not made, I don't think, at the behest of the Revolutionary Army. I think that they finally captured a notorious pirate from his country, his own mother, and in fear of her death, he was forced to follow every command that the world government gave him. They blackmailed him. In a way, this story is actually very similar to Vivi who traveled with the Straw Hat Pirates, right? But it's like taken into the future. This is what eventually happens. Vivi was also a queen of her kingdom, just the same as we assume is the case for Jewelry Bonney. They both became pirates for a time, but Jewelry Bonney was eventually discovered, her past as a pirate was discovered, and the government captured her and used her as a threat against that nation. I think this is why Akainu had a cold shiver when he had heard that Jewelry Bonney ran away from the government. Her freedom could have meant Kuma would also have been free. Another thing that we do not know is how she escaped once again. I think that she didn't. As we see her in the reverie, she didn't escape or didn't infiltrate Mary Joie. She had simply never left. This is where they were keeping her prisoner. They didn't need to lock her up because it is that difficult to leave Mary Joie if they do not want you to. It was not until the revolutionary arrived that she had an opportunity to leave, and she simply used the reverie, this great event, as a distraction to finally get a little bit closer to her son, who she knew was there, and discover his exact location and situation. And so while we're on the topic of Kuma as Jewelry Bonney's son, we know that Brooke's, the Rumbar Pirates, were defeated around 50 years ago, and Kuma is 45 years old, 43 before the time skip. Perhaps Jewelry Bonney was a pirate for 5 years, 50 years ago, roughly. Kuma's father may also have been a pirate under these circumstances. And so with this in mind, maybe the picture of Kuma's motivation to send Straw Hat Luffy to Amazon Lily is a little bit clearer. He sent Luffy there to Elder Nyon, his mother Jewelry Bonney's longtime friend, previous crewmate, to train his hockey. But maybe the more important question here is, what's the point of all of this? Besides it being interesting connections, alright, these characters, they have relationships, but what does it add to the story? Well, if Jewelry Bonney was a former pirate, whose experience comes from this particular time, between 50 and 43 years before the beginning of the story, that places her right at the beginnings of the legends of Gold D. Roger, Whitebeard, and the Rocks Pirates. As Brooke says himself, 50 years ago when he was defeated, he had heard of a young rookie named Roger. She could know of these events, these things, have connections with these people, and provide something from the story in this way. She is unique to the Chichibukai in the fact that she is an old guard, pretending to be part of the new guard. And we reach this crazy conclusion by exploring the various connections that can be made from Jewelry Bonney's inspiration and Bonny, and making sense of it given what we actually know from the story of One Piece. But yeah guys, that's the theory. That is what I had to say today. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think about this. Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.